Do you remember this recent television broadcast from the President of the Russian Federation regarding the current state of affairs in Russia and Ukraine? Much of it was the usual Kremlin bravado, but there were segments where it seemed that cracks in Russia were forming, and, moreover, Putin was not bothering to hide it. Well, this is Russia that we are talking about here. So should we look beyond the mere words of the Kremlin and worry that we are all being played as part of some larger game? I guess it is time to pick up the phone and get to the bottom of this on today's double edition of the Geopolitics Helpline. Recently, Putin has seemingly conceded the Kremlin's shortcomings, especially regarding Russia's shortages. Is there any reason to believe that this is some type of trick? And for a related question, you talk a lot about the incentive to bluff strength. Is there ever an incentive to bluff weakness? I cannot think of any, aside from the general incentive to create misinformation for your opponent. For some high-level answers to the pair of questions, there are many reasons why you might want to feign weakness. However, I do not think that this is the case with Putin currently. Let me begin with a brief review of the more common incentive to bluff strength before we get into the complications for today. Leaders, even men like Putin, prefer not going to war. They would much rather obtain what they want via peaceful negotiations than engage in costly conflicts. As you all know, settlements short of war must be commensurate with what the parties expect to obtain by fighting. This works great when the distribution of power is common knowledge, because anything close to that expected outcome is better for both parties than fighting. Obtaining that outcome and paying the costs of war, as represented by the areas east and west of that expectation, is worse than just taking that expected outcome outright. Unfortunately, the need to reach deals commensurate with the balance of power creates a bargaining problem, specifically a temptation to bluff when there is private information. For example, suppose that Ukraine can better observe the quality of its own troops. Then Russia does not know whether Ukraine expects to secure most of its previously held territory, or whether Ukraine expects Russia will take over a large chunk of the country, and neither does Russia itself know that information. Given that, think about what the weaker type of Ukraine would want to communicate at the bargaining table. If Russia believes that the situation on the right is the reality, then Ukraine can ask for more at the bargaining table and still expect Russia to accept. The problem is that anyone with a geopolitical pulse understands this incentive and therefore discounts any messages that attempt to portray strength. Tap the sign because all you are hearing is uninformative cheap talk. However, as today's questions inquire about, this incentive is not universal. There are indeed various cases where I would want to convince my opponent that I am weak. We can further divide these into a pair of subcases. In one, weak types want to project strength, but strong types want to project weakness. And in the other, both weak and strong types want to project weakness. The dual projection of weakness is easier to understand, so let's begin with that. A relatively trivial case where this arises is with shifting power as a rising state. I do not want you to believe that I will be extremely powerful in the future, because that encourages you to fight a preventive war against me today. You can see this at play right now with China, and everything that Beijing does to try to conceal the future potential threat to Taiwan. This case is a little strange in that the parties try to project weakness not about today, but about the future. Then, once they have arrived in the future, they would want to lose the false pretense and begin to reclaim strength. But they simultaneously want to project strength right now, so as to make preventive war look less attractive to their opponents. Yikes. It is just that one belief about future power where the opposite incentive lies. And if you thought that was fun, a more complicated incentive structure arises when I must worry about how you will militarily mobilize in response to your expectations about my strength. Suppose that you have a middling baseline level of military resources. Meanwhile, you are unsure whether I have very few or a whole lot. If you knew that I had very few, then there would be no need for you to invest any further. What you currently have is more than enough to beat me. However, if you think that I am strong, then you can mobilize more resources at a relatively low cost to still ensure your victory. Now I am in a weird position where I want to convince you that I am weak so you do not want to prepare properly for war against a strong type. Again, that is true whether I am strong or I am weak. Even if I am weak, I still do not want you to mobilize a larger force, because fighting a somewhat losing battle is still better for me than fighting a very losing battle. Moving on, we still have situations where the weak want to project strength and the strong want to project weakness. This arises when militaries are trying to adopt appropriate countermeasures on the battlefield given what they expect to happen. The end of World War II provides an interesting example of this. By the summer of 1945, Japan was precariously low on aviation fuel and had broadly stopped running air patrols to defend the Japanese homeland. This worked out great for the United States because it meant that the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki essentially went uncontested. In contrast, you could imagine a world where Japan had known that the United States had nuclear weapons that could be dropped out of the back of an airplane. That Japan would have made the sacrifice on fuel reserves to put up some level of defenses. Had the United States been weak in this instance, defined as not having nuclear weapons, then Washington would have wanted to signal strength to convince Japan to needlessly exhaust those resources. For a more modern example, you only need to go back to the start of the Ukraine war. Ukraine was undermanned as the Russian invasion began. Correspondingly, there are various reports of Ukrainian soldiers attempting to mimic the radio chatter of a large squadron of troops, so as to convince Russian commanders not to attack actually vulnerable areas. In fact, the gambit may have worked along the southern front, stopping a Russian advance toward Odessa that Ukraine may very well have been unable to defend. So, circling back to the top, when we see Putin go on television and discuss the trying times that Russian civilians are going through due to the Ukrainian airstrikes against oil infrastructure, you may wonder whether this is some sort of elaborate trap. For instance, maybe Russia has been developing and producing large quantities of anti-aircraft defenses. In turn, if Ukraine takes Putin at his word, then Ukraine may invest in more long-range drones and missiles. This would play into the Kremlin's trap, because Russia has appropriately invested in stopping those, leaving Ukraine having invested in something unimportant and underinvested in more productive sectors. That being said, I do not think that is what is happening here. Rather, Russia is in a situation where the mess of Russia's oil economy is plain to see by everyone. You cannot hide high gas prices and supply shortages. If Putin pretends like it is not a problem, he only looks foolish and out of touch to the Russian public. Thus, the proper political play is to acknowledge the situation, downplay it as being a temporary setback, and reassure the Russian public that the very competent Putin administration will take care of the problem. That is my reading of the situation anyway. We will have to wait and see what the reality is. Meanwhile, there is no need to wait and see what you could be watching next. It's right here. It's the Geopolitics Helpline Archive. Check them all out right now. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.